We got to get down to business. Be not afraid. Be not afraid. That's the providential theme of your conference today. And what I thought I would do, everybody, is maybe for the next half hour or so, hold up to you men, brothers in Jesus Christ, hold up to you men what I consider to be 3 stellar examples of people, men, who were not afraid. All right? And I'm talking about our last 3 popes. Blessed John Paul II, Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, and now our beloved Pope Francis. All right? So I want to spend about a half hour, 35 minutes on those 3 popes, and I would propose to you that they can teach us a lot about not being afraid. And I would propose to you that a good way to understand the gifts, the charisms of these 3 popes would be to look at Blessed John Paul II as restoring the soul of the church. Let's look at Benedict XVI as enhancing the mind of the church. And let's look at our beloved Pope Francis as restoring the heart of the church, all right? Soul, head, and heart. John Paul, Benedict, and Francis. Now, I don't mean to imply all 3 of the popes spoke about and helped restore soul, head, and heart. This is just kind of perhaps a little easier way to understand them. Let's start with blessed, soon to be Saint, John Paul II, okay? And let me propose to you that he set his mission in his close to 27 inspired years as successor of St. Peter and chief pastor of the Church Universal as a restoration of the soul of the church. When he visited in 1979, his first pastoral visit to the church in the United States, when he was greeted at the White House, then President Jimmy Carter called John Paul II the soul of the world. Billy Graham described him as a providential prescription for humanity's exhausted soul. And not long before he died, a good friend of mine, Rabbi Gilbert Rosenthal, who was taking a group of Jewish leaders to visit him, responded to a journalist who said, "But the Pope is ill, the Pope's body is broken, the Pope is exhausted, the Pope can hardly talk." And Rabbi Rosenthal said, "We're not going to see his body, we're going to see his soul." A recovery of the primacy of the spiritual. Such became the job description of Blessed John Paul II. You take care of the soul, John Paul said, and everything else is going to fall into place. Now, he himself, John Paul II himself, I would propose, bordered on the mystic. You know what a mystic is, right? A mystic is one who periodically enjoys the union with God for which most of us have to wait for heaven. All right? There are a few mystics in the church, but I think Blessed John Paul II was one of them. Those of us like Archbishop Hebda and I, who were privileged to attend his private mass in the morning in his chapel, when we'd go in at 5 to 7, knowing that he had been there since 6, kneeling in prayer before the Blessed Sacrament in his chapel, we would see him locked in prayer, hypnotized. We would hear him groan. We would hear him sigh. Periodically you would see a tear, and you would know that this was a man for whom prayer was literally union with God. He himself bordered on the mystic. He himself knew the essential component of a vibrant spiritual life. Now Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, who was Archbishop Meyer's predecessor, told the story of when Blessed John Paul II visited here, the Archdiocese of Newark, in 1995, you remember? almost 20 years ago. And Archbishop McCarrick was waiting for the helicopter to come over the Hudson, and as usual, John Paul was late. And there were 100,000 people waiting for him at the stadium, and it was pouring down rain, and Archbishop McCarrick was nervous. And suddenly, about an hour later, the helicopter came, the helicopter landed, the police lights went on for the motorcade, the Pope's attendants came out, the security came out, but no John Paul. And Cardinal McCarrick began to get nervous as they waited a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. And finally, John Paul's secretary said to Archbishop McCarrick, "Be patient, there's no rushing him. He's praying his office." He's praying his office. Here was a man who knew the importance that if his own soul wasn't brimming over with God's grace and mercy, he was useless. He couldn't give it to other people, because what you don't have, you can't give. Here was a man whose own interior life, his own soul, gave him an immense sense of intestinal fortitude. Here was a man who was "be not afraid" incarnate. Here was a man, as George Will said, here's a pope who knows how to pope. All right? Do you remember when he went to Poland on his second visit there in 82? I'm going to talk about the first one in a minute. But in his second visit in 1982, remember how fragile the situation in Poland was? There were literally 100,000 Russian troops on the border of Poland. It was much like Ukraine now. There was martial law. Things were in chaos. Protests all over. And John Paul arrives, and as he is greeted by the military dictator, General Jaruzelski, John Paul is the essence of serenity and peace and confidence. General Jaruzelski, who was backed up by 100,000 bayonets, literally had his knees knocking with fear. So nervous was he. This is a man whose soul gave rise to his courage and allowed him to be not afraid. Why was his soul so alive? A part of it probably was because he boarded on the Mystic. Part of it as well is because he came from the high-octane Catholicism of Poland, and part of it is because of his own life. You know the story, Karol Wojtyła, born in 1920 in a Poland that was decimated, in a Poland that was in the dirt after the ravages of the First World War. He watched Poland slowly rebuild. He can barely remember his mother because she died when he was only 7. His sister soon after. He was to come home and find his own father on the floor dead, and his brother, whom he loved and idolized, a physician, died soon after, having caught a contagious virus from people to whom he was ministering. This was a man who early on learned that it was pretty much him and God. This is a man who saw Poland begin to rebuild when on September 1st, 1939, when he was 19 years of age and was walking from his village to school, saw the German Luftwaffe come in as they invaded and took over Poland. This is a man who then saw his friends arrested. This is a man who had to sneak in and out of the clandestine seminary at the Archbishop's house in Krakow. This was a man who himself, coming home from working in a chemical factory late at night, was run over by a troop of Nazi soldiers and left for dead. This is a man who saw his beloved, who saw the troops of Nazism defeated, but who then heard the jackboots of Stalin's communist Russia come in and take over again his beloved Poland. As the historians tell us, Poland lost the war twice. This was a man who grew to know what the psalmist meant. Only in God is my soul at rest. Do not fear those who can kill the body. Fear only those who can extinguish the life of the soul. So no wonder his first words in his homily on October 22nd, 1978, as he stunned the world as the new Pope from Poland, were simply, "Do not be afraid," the theme of our day together. Be not afraid. To restore the exhausted spiritual life of the church's soul became his major goal. How did he do it? Well, we can learn a lot, you and me as Catholic men, because our souls are exhausted as well, correct? I don't think you'd be here if you didn't think you needed a booster shot for the soul today, right? So how did Blessed John Paul II restore the exhausted soul of the church? First, by putting Jesus first, the utter centrality of Jesus Christ. He wanted to return to 30 AD. He wanted the church once again, and each member of the church, to meet Jesus Christ on the shore of the Sea of Galilee and to hear Jesus say, "Come, follow me." After the first year of his pontificate, André Foussard, a French intellectual, wrote his life. And André Foussard said, "Everybody's saying we have a pope from Poland. No, we don't. We got a pope from Palestine." Because what he wants to do is bring us all back to the shore of the Sea of Galilee, where once again we can be intrigued by a person called Jesus, fall in love with him, and give him our soul, mind, and body. The centrality of Jesus Christ. To see Jesus Christ really and truly present in the Most Holy Eucharist. To sense Jesus Christ in the needs of the poor. To discover Jesus Christ in the truth of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic faith. For him, for Blessed John Paul II, truth was not a thing but a person, incarnate in the one who said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." This is the Pope who wakes up the exhausted soul of the church by telling us that Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ alone is the answer to the question posed by every human life. Be not afraid. This is the Pope who tells us that we need confidence and conviction not from what we got, not from what we earn, not from what we do, but from who we are, children of God, made in his image and likeness, redeemed by the precious blood of his only begotten Son, called to communion with him in the family that we cherish as the church. Is there ever a time that it became more obvious than in June of 1979, when John Paul II decided to return to his beloved Poland? These, June 1 through 10, 1979, have been dubbed 10 days that changed the world. Henry Kissinger says, in those 10 days, John Paul II did for Poland what Winston Churchill did for England in the horrors of the Second World War. Mikhail Gorbachev said, after those 10 days, we knew that communism was finished. What happened? John Paul II visited Poland. 2/3 of the country turned out to see him as he winded his way up streets and through villages. Never did he mention the word communism. Never did he speak about economics or politics. He only spoke about the noble truths of our faith. He only spoke about Jesus Christ. And it all came to a climax on the last day in Victory Square in Warsaw. 2 million Poles gathered for his final Mass. 2 million Poles gathered for the final Mass. It was at the end of his pilgrimage. Those 2 million people and all of Poland that was watching on TV had just experienced the exhilaration of spiritual revival, as for the first time probably since the Franco-Prussian War, when Poland's name was literally erased from the map, they had lifted their head high and began to say, I'm not alone. I'm not a number. I'm not a cog in a wheel. I'm not some cell in some communist collectivity. I got a name. I got a family. I got a heritage. I got a culture. I've got people that share my values. I have a faith. I have a church. I have a religion. I am not alone, and I am not afraid. As Solidarity was born, a name that became Kitchen Table. And there in that square in Warsaw, remember, knowing that he was going to leave right afterwards, John Paul began to speak, and about 30 seconds into his homily, remember what happened? It started in a corner of the vast crowd.